Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm very happy to have you for our global conversation on materiality and mediality. I'm very delighted to have some of our presenters here today from all across the world. Joining us and myself, I'm Callie Buckley. I work at CAA, and I'm also here with Allison Walters, who will be helping with our tech support. So first, I just want to say a few things. Hi, Allison. About the meeting. If you could, we're going to ask that you keep your video and microphone off. As of right now, they should be off, but we will be taking our questions later through the chat rather than having video so that we can go through them and so that the presenters have the chance to go through them each with their video on. If you have any difficulties, you're free to contact info@collegeart.org and they should be able to help you. We also recommend using Google Chrome if you have any issues watching this, and that'll give you the best experience. And we'll be taking questions after all the talks have been given, once again through the chat function. You should also be able to turn on closed captioning if necessary. So as of right now, we will be recording and transcribing, just so you know, and that recording will be available later to all registrants and CAA members. Thank you. So with that, I welcome you to our global conversation on materiality and mediality. And I introduce our Executive Director and CEO of College Art Association, or CAA, Meme Omongbai.
Thank you, Callie. Hello, all CA members, affiliated societies, participants, and attendees. I am Meme Omobai, Executive Director and CEO of CAA. Welcome, all of you, to our very first Global Conversations, Materiality and Mediation. CAA is proud to present this virtual symposium in partnership with two of our valued affiliated societies, the Design History Society, based in the United Kingdom, and the International Association of Word and Image Studies, based in France. Affiliated societies are cohorts of CAA members intensely engaged in discipline, subject matter, or other special interests. With immense gratitude, we will be presenting these affiliated societies with CAA's inaugural Certificate of Partnership for participating in and contributing to this event today. For us, in so many ways, this is history making, and it is important to our ongoing service to our global community. This symposium today will explore the intersection of materiality and mediation and represents several areas of interest across CAA's constituencies, most notably the areas of art, design, and word and image studies. The event will bring to you virtually thanks to the ongoing efforts of CAA to build a digital infrastructure that will future-proof our organization in the interest of all the constituencies we serve around the globe. For the first time in our history, our technology can facilitate this kind of global convening that has yielded hundreds of registrations for today's program from literally all over the globe: Brazil, the United Kingdom, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Romania, Turkey, Nigeria, India, Singapore, China, South Korea, Russia, Mexico, Canada, the entire universe. Also, for the first time, our technology allows disabled participants to watch this program live at their own pace. We still have much work to do to better serve our disabled constituents, but the technological capabilities embedded within this program demonstrate a significant step forward, and we invite you to engage with us on our journey towards service to all. There is intentionality behind the increase in virtual programming at CAA, and this extends beyond needs that arose during the pandemic. For global exchanges in particular, virtual connection is fundamental to our responding to the expressed desires of the constituencies of CAA to expand global access, while also enabling us to remain steadfast in our commitment to reduce our carbon footprint in the midst of the global climate crisis. Thank you to all who helped produce and who are participating in these global conversations, Materiality and Mediation, especially our four mission partners, the Design History Society and the International Association of Word and Image Studies. Appreciation must also be paid to our members, without whose scholarship there is no organization. The scholars participating in today's program, attendees from around the globe, and Kali are here, CAA's Manager of Education, Intellectual Property, and Director of CAA Get International Program, for her work producing this event. And of course, you've met Allison, Able Tech. To our attendees who are not CAA members, thank you for coming. And please consider joining CAA by visiting collegeart.org/membership. CAA membership dues have a direct impact on the availability of this kind of programming. Thank you once again for being here and for ensuring CAA's position as a global presence for visual arts practice and scholarship. I look forward to many more opportunities for generative discourse that transcends geographic boundaries. Thanks, Callie.
Thank you, Mei. And now I would like to welcome Grace and Laurence to say a bit.
Thank you, Callie. On behalf of the chair of the Design History Society, Dr. Sally Ann Huxtable, and myself, I'd like to thank Meme Omagbai, Callie Buckley, and the College Art Association for partnership and for hosting this event, and Professor Laurence Roussillon-Constanti from IRAWIS for being a gracious and constructive co-convener. The Design History Society was founded in 1977 to promote and support the study and understanding of design history in interdisciplinary contexts. Interdisciplinarity is shown in this event and the Society's other activities and publications, including the Journal of Design History, which I'm proud to serve as chair of the editorial board for. In my work on mediation, such as the production-consumption mediation paradigm of 2009, I've shown how design historians have examined the role of mediating discourses in the understanding of design, and that, at the same time, design is a mediating channel. More recently, I co-convened a panel at the 2022 CAA conference about materials in design history, demonstrating the utility and currency of such a focus, not least as a revisionist strategy in the context of our climate emergency. Design historians and others are attentive to the ways in which materials are formed from and form and communicate the purpose and politics of the designed world. By bringing materiality and mediation together, we see how design, objects, places, practices, is formed from our social worlds and in turn forms them. This innovative collaborative event attracted many proposals from which we're delighted to have selected excellent innovative research presentations, which I hope you will enjoy. And now I'll pass to Laurence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the chair of the International Association of Word and Image Studies, Liliane Nouvelle, and as secretary of JARVIS, I also would like to warmly thank Cali Buckley and the College of Art Association and Meme Omagbai for hosting this event. It's been a real pleasure collaborating with CAA and with the Design History Society, first with Claire O'Mahony and now with Salian and Grace, of course. The International Association of Word and Image Studies, in French Association Internationale pour l'étude des rapports entre texte et image, was founded in 1987. It's a truly European venture. It was founded in the Netherlands, and it seeks to foster the study of word and image relations in a general cultural context, and especially in the arts in the broadest sense. Our members generally have a background in the humanities, and many of them come from various disciplines: art history, literature, languages, and design. The main objective of our organization is to encourage teaching and research on intermediality in all its forms. JAVIS members usually meet once a year at the CA conference and once in 3 years for their other main conference. The topic for our forthcoming conference, which is due to take place in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte at the end of August, beginning of September, is entitled Sedimentation Towards an Archaeology of Word and Image. The chosen topic is, of course, related to the geographical location of the conference, but it also illustrates the way our organization aims to promote dialogue between disciplines to think about text and image relations. Indeed, the notion of sedimentation can be considered in a very broad way as a dynamic process, as it describes the various layers or strata of materials, that is, textual or visual documents, as much as artifacts that make up culture. I also very much look forward to today's presentations and exchanges, and thank you again for attending.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to both of you. And I'm very excited to let you know that we have 4 talks and 6 presenters today. We'll be exploring the boundaries and interconnections of materiality and mediality in the order of the earliest chronology to the most recent. And I must say that this really does show the scope of what this topic could mean. So I'm going to start with Wenyi Qian and her talk, Tavolina de Joy, the mediation of material techniques in the late Cinquecento handstone inlaid tables.
Thank you for College Art Association and Design History Society to host this event and discuss some of the key concepts that are quite dear to my own research. So I'll start straight away. On a hardstone inlaid table from around 1587, sent from Rome to Madrid as a gift to Philip II, a centerpiece of agate in oval form was encircled by an alternating string of multicolored precious stones, as if crowned by a bejeweled chain of gems. These individual components of the outer ring are further encrusted with rings and frames of even smaller gems, and the rhetoric of bejeweled enframing and encircling is furthered by multiple layers of oval chains of stones. This whole lavish spectacle of gems is reiterated on 2 much smaller oval flanking the central one. The outer frame of the entire rectangular surface is further populated with interlocked chain of ovals, hexagons, and circles. The overall effect is almost vertiginous, with its dramatic shuttling of perceptual scales between the large framed ovals and the sequence and layers of even smaller enframing units. In its lavishly hyperbolic material and visual presentation, this inlaid tabletop appropriates and flaunts the visual bedazzlement of gems and jewelry. The 3 main pieces of oval agates are honored by chains of jewels, as if they are 3 enlarged gemstones, further connected by 4 circular pieces of amethyst. The centerpieces of precious stones are thus both framed as gems and strung into a larger chain of jewels, each acting as a centerpiece and a unit in an incomplete sequence. It offers a kind of infinite mise en abîme through the playful shuttling between the in-frame and the in-framing. Indeed, in its almost obsessive display of the variety of lithic surfaces, the alternating colors and hues of stones creates a kind of shimmering effect, much like the scintillation of faceted gems. Both in its formal, representational, and optical qualities, this tabletop is a supreme example of the creative mediation of jewel-like effects in late Cinquecento tabletop design. It amplifies and makes explicit other latent connections between what period authors sometimes call tavolino di gioie and gioiello or gioielliera. The phrase tavolino di gioie, literally a little table made of precious stones, is, for instance, used by Vasari in his description of a table designed by Buontalenti for Francesco de' Medici at a time when we began to have the earliest series of textual and material records of such objects. The diminutive tavolino offers the dual possibility of indicating the relative dimension of an object, that it is smaller than other comparable objects, and of accentuating its aesthetic and material preciosity, offering a kind of rhetorical redoubling of the preciosity of the object with that of the materials it is made of. The semantic modesty of the term also hints at the object's experimental quality, that it's a kind of draft of an object type in its infancy. I am interested, however, in how this invocation of a scalar reduction alongside preciosity offers the path towards the metaphor of jams. Inlay tables are a kind of jam in an architectural space. In previous scholarship, the relationship between small-scale gemstone cutting and hardstone inlay is stressed as one based on technical distinction. For instance, the prominent Italian scholar on pietrature, Anna Maria Giusti, notes how artisans working on carved objects and vessels seldom engage in the inlay technique. We of course know that the Medici court engaged in the introduction of Milanese and Lombard artisans skilled in the making of hardstone objects, especially rock crystals, to Florence, when their interest in pietrature gradually reached its crescendo towards the later decades of the 16th century. Justice is a necessary caution against facile connections or wishful thinking that artisans skilled in one technique could easily practice a different art. But this caution should not limit our imagination in seeing different hardstone-based techniques as related to each other. For instance, the cabinets covered with small inlay panels often contains actual gems and mineral specimens. Sometimes they are even decorated with large faceted gems, as shown in this design by the Lombard artisan Giuseppe Bianchi for a cabinet in the Tribuna in Uffizi. The pictorial assemblage of stones also finds comparable manifestation in both hardstone inlaid tabletops and the encrusting of faceted gems to form figurative motifs in jewelry pieces. In both cases, individual pieces of stones were used to carry a dual function of material presence and as a node in a representational matrix. This interest in the lithic capacity in generating pictorial image and representation is realized in the form of tabletop and jewelry. Beyond these formal resemblances, however, I am more interested in how certain design logic cuts across the boundaries of scale and media. It is interesting, for instance, that both furniture design and jewelry have been connected to the art of architecture. Inlay tables were often posited as artifactual footnotes to palatial construction, its own agency and complexity dwarfed by an overarching edifice complex. On the other hand, the historian of diamond cuts, Herbert Tillander, has made a tantalizing suggestion that the development of table-cut diamond with 16 crown facets in the mid-17th century recalled Palladio's Pythagorean diagrams. Such suggestions belie the difficulty of writing a history of minor arts on their own terms, whereby the usual recourse is to point to a conceptual origin beyond their materiality and making towards something that lies in the realm of the major arts. In this way, the Palladian diagram becomes a kind of Platonic idea, a formal mode into which material and technical practices of a different kind could be cast. By settling the origin of design ideas in the diagram of a canonical Renaissance architect, a clear hierarchy is maintained and a channel of transmission of ideas established from monumental construction into the minor arts. To counter this hierarchical conception, I suggest rather to take a lateral approach. I contend that what is revealed through the confrontation of an architectural diagram and the jewelry is not so much the relationship of a source and the endpoint of its influence, but rather ways in which certain design logics cut across scales and find diverse manifestation in artistic media. One key technical logic that binds tabletop ornament with architectural decoration and certain forms of jewelry making is that of the replication and assemblage of spatial modules along certain axes. And in some sense, it is in such gem configurations, such as the rosette form, that such logic is most visibly and tangibly demonstrated and rendered operational and transferable onto other scales. And it is that very logic that is elaborated in the spatially symmetrical ornamental tabletop. Let's take a look at a mid-16th century drawn design of an inlaid table to tease out this logic more fully. This drawing, likely produced as a reference for customers in a pattern book, performs the conceptual separation of tabletop with its planar visuality from the anthropomorphic sculptural base. The contrast between geometric abstraction and zoomorphism, between planar and profile views, reveals two conceptualizations of the table, either as a visual image or as an object with a specific material presence and spatial anchorage. It is best to understand this drawing as an ideational notation that engages with a particular kind of spatial imagination triggered by the actual experience of inlaid tables as material objects. The key here is the asymmetrical presentation of two different designs for the supporting stand. The idea is that the artisan would present two possible designs to the customer, and the one chosen would then be replicated to form a steady base. This logic of replication has at its central unit what I would like to call a spatial module. That is, a modular component to be reproduced in space along a central axis. As a design proposal, the representation of a single base module could be conceived as an invitation for the viewer customer to exercise his imagination for modular replication. It is a visual shorthand that calls for further generation and points to an integral objecthood by soliciting the viewer's spatial imagination. And it is here that the representation of the tabletop design takes on a different connotation. Beyond a simple representation of geometric design, the centralized symmetry of this octagonal surface visually demonstrates what the drawn zoomorphic bases emphatically avoid. That is, the symmetrical replication and generation of ornamental modules in 360 degrees. We could then envision the geometric ornament in the upper register as a kind of visual cue or performative blueprint. It performs the logic of modular replication in space as a tentative guide for the replication that is not represented but implied in the lower register. The drawing's evocation of modular replication and activation of spatial imagination taps a mode of artisanal thinking and making that is both transferable and analogous to the making of rosette diamonds and also that of multi-sided micro-architectural elements. And to further anchor this interpretation of the axial replication and rotation of spatial modules, I move towards a slightly different emphasis. Instead of thinking about the fascination with geometric pattern in tabletop design as a purely two-dimensional and formal phenomena, we could, by taking into account how tables, as multi-sided objects, generate specific spatial experience. We can conceive of the geometry of inlay table as metaphorically a material carving of space. To conceive of the geometric shape in a table as having sides and indeed facets rather than linear contours both rematerializes and respatializes forms as having a physical and spatial presence or boundary, and it allows for a rapprochement between gemstone faceting and tabletop design. To stress the analogy between the faceting of gems and the shaping of multi-sided space via playful geometric ornament is to argue for the centrality of artisanal making and lithic materiality in the generation of spatial and design ideas. It stresses the production of space as embedded in the interaction between matter and techniques. As revealed by research on the history of gemology, it is around the first few decades of the 16th century that certain breakthrough of gemstone faceting took place. Jewelers began to multiply the number of facets in the cutting and material design of gems. These changes in technique were motivated by new abrasive materials and interest in creating more complex refractive effects. It resulted in ever more complex topography of the faceted gems, which mirrors some of the most vertiginous design in geometric tabletop. I argue that it is in this way that we might read some of the emphatic evocation of gem-like forms and geometry in inlay tables. That instead of simply a representation of gem on a flat surface, it is in fact a kind of channeling of the materially based spatial conception in activating the interaction between the human body and the table as an object. It also evokes and remediates gems' refractive visual effects. By rematerializing and respatializing lines in geometric designs into sides, boundaries, facets as material and spatial interfaces, we could retrace the common thread between jewels, tables, and buildings, not simply as mediated by two-dimensional design, but also as fundamentally embodiment of material spaces, shaped by facture and soliciting embodied responses. Seen in this way, this table currently housed at the Pitti Palace on the left, and which has been interpreted in relation to cosmological and perspectival diagrams, could be meaningfully juxtaposed with ever more complex combination of differently shaped facets in diamond cuts. Just like the jewelers who carve the central shape of a diamond by applying triangular, rectangular, and square facets onto the material structure of stones, the designer of this table surrounded the central octagon of amethyst with a radiating variation of circles, ovals, triangles, and other polygonal shapes. The final design reads like a flattened version of the spatial configuration of gem facets and visualizes through the materiality of multicolored stones the optical refraction that these facets generate within the body of a diamond. Between surface effects, optical relay, and materially oriented spatiality, the faceted gem presents itself as akin to the geometric play and material facture of late Cinquecento tabletop design. To close, I suggest one last connection between tables and jewels. Both are material luxury commissioned for specific social political occasions, of which a prime example is the courtly marriage. While objects of diverse sizes, tables and jewels were often present in the rituals of exchange and gift-giving as commemoration of official bond-making. If jewelry in its personal connection with the body of an aristocratic figure carried through a sense of durable personhood, inlay tables as royal gifts also often contain signs of identity as prominent aspect of the design, sometimes with combined signs to demonstrate and materialize forms of political and familial alliances. Both heartstone objects, albeit of different scales, possess similar ritual and social political agencies. Throughout this paper, I present jewels and inlaid tables as material, technical, and symbolic cognates in order to counter and displace a facile connection between architecture and its monumentality, and to suggest ways in which making on small scales and intermediary scales might have moved across objects of diverse media. I also stressed a sense or notion of space that is materially and technically motivated, and that could potentially help us to reconnect architecture, furniture, and jewelry in a more lateral and non-hierarchical way. As a tentative sketch, it seeks to suggest ways in which inlaid tables were situated at an intermediate and multi-scalar crossroad of making, and could offer a potent case for methodological discussion on materiality, mediation, and craft. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Wen Yi for a fascinating presentation on these precious and jewel-like pieces of furniture. I also want to thank our attendees for their patience. Just a reminder that this is a Teams webinar. So if you have the possibility of pressing sync to presenter, that will make it so that there are no interruptions in our video as we present them. So I want to thank you again. And I want to bring up our next presenter, which is Noga Bernstein, presenting on mediating the meaning of textiles through exhibition displays in Israel from the 1950s to 1970s.
Good morning, good afternoon. My presentation is titled Mediating the Meaning of Textiles Through Exhibition Displays in Israel from the 1950s to the 1970s. Between the 1950s and 1970s, textiles played different roles in the consolidating culture of the nascent Israeli state. They were the products of Israel's second largest industry that benefited from major government subsidies. They were associated with traditional craft brought by recently arrived Jewish immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa and were appropriated by the Ashkenazi establishment as Israeli folk art. They were also associated with modernist idioms of hand weaving brought to Israel by German Jewish designers trained at the Bauhaus and similar design schools. And eventually they began to be recognized as a form of fine art, reflecting new ideas about craft as individual creative practice. This paper examines the role of museum and gallery exhibitions as a system of mediation that convey to the Israeli public ideas about the diverse functions and cultural perceptions of textiles through devices such as selection and juxtaposition, text and images in catalogs, invitations, and press items, or titles. Despite their different agendas, all the exhibition I discuss aestheticize textiles, namely reposition them as artistic rather than domestic objects. And at the same time, these exhibitions participated in the contested debate over the identity of Israeli material culture, grounded in an ongoing tension between local values and global currents. I begin with an exhibition held in 1956 at the Bezalel National Museum called Art of the Everyday, which included different fields of handmade items for everyday use by local designers. The Bezalel Museum was founded in 1906 as a section of the Bezalel School of Art and Craft, the first Hebrew art school in Palestine, which aimed to cultivate Jewish national arts, both through academic fine art and through cottage industries of traditional craft. The school closed in 1929 and reopened in 1935 by a group of German Jewish artists who immigrated to Palestine from Nazi Germany and reconceptualized the school based on the principles of the Bauhaus and other German schools. At that point, the school and the museum were separate institutions, but they shared the campus and continued to collaborate. Since the early 1940s, the museum held a series of award-carrying applied art exhibitions, which prominently featured Bezalel teachers and graduates and reflected their functionalist ideology. Art of the Everyday was the first applied art exhibition since the Israeli state was founded in 1948. Because large Israeli textile factories rarely employ designers, exhibitors in the textile section included designers working on a smaller scale. There are no available images from the exhibition, unfortunately, but the list of works in the textile section includes 4 textile workshops and 9 individual designers. 4 of them were related to Bezalel, including the German-born handweaver Julia Keiner, founder and director of the Bezalel textile department, and 3 of her students. Their works, not these specific ones, but their general style, reflected Keiner's ideology that a design must emanate from the material and process of weaving. Keiner studied textile design at the innovative Kunstschule Frankfurt, and she instilled in her students the ideals of German functionalism. Her studio work and classes focused solely on functional items such as rugs, curtains, placemats, and other textiles for interiors. This was exactly the focus of Art of the Everyday, which presented primarily hand-woven home fabrics and rugs and a few fashion fabrics. The exhibition was sponsored by the Israeli government's Ministry of Trade and Industry and aimed to promote local design and present the possibility of merging art and industry. This was no small challenge. In many ways, the mere connection between aesthetics and objects of everyday use was foreign and even opposed to the socialist values of the hegemonic Israeli culture. It's hard to know what impact this and other applied art exhibitions had on the broader acceptance of commercial design, though I believe the impact was very limited. But by literally pulling textiles out of the everyday realm and placing them in the realm of art, Art of the Everyday possibly paved the way for future exhibitions that treated textiles, sometimes the same textiles, as artworks. For example, 2 years later, in 1958, the Haifa Museum of Art presented Photography, Ceramics, Textiles, which was called in Hebrew Photography, Ceramics, Weaving, which was part of a series of museum exhibitions held in celebration of Israel's 10th anniversary. The only 2 images in the catalog did not show textiles, but they very intentionally aestheticized the 2 other media, photography and ceramics. The catalog included a brief but pointed statement, likely written by the curators, who only signed their initials. It proudly stated that the museum selected fields that exemplified, quote, extreme vitality and immediate contact with life, end quote, as opposed to other anniversary exhibitions that were dedicated to fine art fields such as painting and sculpture. The weaving section included similar items to those shown in Art of the Everyday, knotted rugs by Keiner and fabrics, napkins, and tablecloths by Warshawski, her former student, and another weaver called Rosa Lubarni. But the catalog attempted to highlight their pure aesthetic character by differentiating them from other types of weaving. Quote, in the craft of weaving, one must discern between popular art, revived in recent years by immigrants from Oriental countries, and the art of weaving for the sake of its own, end quote. And they added that, quote, Keiner knows how to extract from various materials rhythms and effects which gives her textiles the quality of purity and beauty, end quote. In other words, the curators reframed Keiner's rugs as pure art as opposed to popular art, which was an awkward translation of the Hebrew term for folk art. What they actually referred to was traditional weaving made by Jewish communities who arrived to Israel in the 1950s from Islamic countries in the Middle East and North Africa. The derisive tone of the text would not surprise anyone familiar with the history of racism against these immigrants by the Ashkenazi Israeli establishment. But the so-called Oriental Jewish textile traditions were also celebrated as forms of an authentic Jewish craft that could stimulate a modern national art in Israel. In 1955, the Tel Aviv Museum dedicated an exhibition to Maskit, a government organization founded by Ruth Dayan in 1954 under the Ministry of Labor, with the mission of providing work to newly arrived immigrants through home industries and traditional craft. During its early years, Maskit employed hundreds of hand weavers, embroiderers, and silversmiths, recently arrived mainly from Yemen, Libya, Persia, and other Islamic countries, to create fashion and home goods that integrated their traditional methods in models that would fit a modern Israeli taste. As art historian Yael Gilat noted, it was precisely Dayan's ability to recruit the Tel Aviv Museum, a haven of modernist fine art, for a craft exhibition that positioned Maskit as an emblem of both Israeli high fashion and Israeli folk art. In addition to products, the exhibition included live demonstrations of Yemenite silversmithing and of a group of weavers originally from Tripoli, Libya. In the catalog, Tel Aviv Museum director Eugen Kolb identified these artisans as remnants of the ancient Hebrew tribes, and press coverage described them through exotifying tokens such as the Oriental Bazaar. More recent critiques compare these live demonstrations to fraught historical precedents, such as the indigenous villages in world expositions. In all fairness, live demonstrations were also a regular feature of modern craft exhibitions in the 20th century. But the two interpretations are not incommensurate with each other. In fact, in village home craft, traditional weaving and embroidery was exotified, while also reconceptualized as partaking in the invention of modern Israel. Mesquite, which has been the most successful and widely studied brand of Israeli design, was both harshly criticized and widely celebrated for its use of traditional craft during its 4 decades of operation. But in fact, during the 1960s, Mesquite gradually shifted its focus from home industries to cultivating Israeli modern craft that reflected new perceptions of craft as a form of individual creativity. This process was particularly apparent in the textiles produced and promoted by Mesquite. For example, through Mesquite 6, Israel's first modern craft gallery that operated between 1966 and 73 from Mesquite's flagship store in Tel Aviv. The opening exhibition was of printed fabrics by members of the avant-garde art group 10+, a radical shift from Mesquite's public display in village home craft only a decade earlier. Hanna Kralova, a Czechoslovakian-born Israeli lace artist who worked in the contemporary Eastern European style, received several exhibitions at Mesquite 6, and in 1967, the gallery presented the exhibition Dividers, with one-of-a-kind room dividers, especially commissioned from artists working in different media. The shift from traditional craft to individual art craft or art design began earlier, as in 1960, Mesquite opened a department for printed textiles manufactured in a small factory and designed by a wide roster of artists, some of whom showed works at the gallery as well. Mesquite's weaving department was led since 1959 by Nora Warshavsky, who studied with Kiner and Bezalel, as I mentioned, and integrated some of the traditional methods of the home weavers she worked with the functionalist principles of Kiner's teaching. The weaving department remained dedicated to functional fabrics for home and fashion, but Warshavsky herself became one of Israel's tireless promoters of art textiles. In 1964, Warshavsky was one of a small group of Israeli craft makers who participated in the first World Craft Congress convened in New York by Eileen Osborne Webb, the philanthropist and craft promoter who helped reposition craft in the United States as an individualist art practice. I cannot fully discuss the socioeconomic reasons behind Mesquite's shift from home craft to modern craft, but Mesquite's involvement with this new international movement was a defining factor. Warshavsky was a founding member and later chair of Israel's Designers Craftsmen Association, which managed Israel's delegations to the World Craft Congress and promoted Israeli craft locally and abroad. Ruth Dayan supported the association through Mesquite and was also a steady and impactful presence in World Craft Congresses during the 1970s. The apex of the Designer Craftsmen Association's activities in Israel was, in my opinion, the exhibition Works in Thread, Works by Israeli Artists and Industrial Products, an unprecedented display of contemporary textiles, fabrics, and fiber art held at the Israel Museum in 1975. The exhibition was initiated by the association, but curated by Izika Gaon, the visionary director and chief curator of the Israel Museum's Design and Architecture Department that had just opened in 1972. Works in Thread featured works constructed of thread in any technique, weaving, embroidery, applique, looping, knotting, and other, excluding batik or printed textiles. Unlike previous exhibitions I discussed, it emphasized materiality over end product, as explicitly manifested in the invitation that featured not any specific work, but a drawing of an unidentified construction of woven and looped threads. The exhibition included both functional and non-functional objects, but it highlighted experimental avant-garde methods of working with thread. For example, the thin brochure presented one work only, a three-dimensional wall hanging or soft sculpture as described by the artist Judith Bloch. While the work was quite small, the close-up photograph made it seem monumental and emphasized its material sensuality and sculptural quality. Most press items featured three-dimensional wall hangings by artists such as Bloch or Nora Frankel, a reputable painter who trained at Cooper Hewitt before moving to Israel and was also a self-taught weaver. One of Frankel's abstract woven works for the exhibition was titled Homage to Sheila, referring, of course, to the fiber art superstar Sheila Hicks, And although these early examples of Israeli fiber art were not as monumental as the works of Hicks or Magdalena Bakanowitz, they rejected both the usefulness of crafts and the flatness of traditional tapestries in favor of a liberated use of fiber material. Gaon highlighted this element by, for example, centrally placing this freestanding macrame sculpture by Tirza Uzieli, which intentionally privileged experimentation over technical meticulousness. The exhibition also included a significant group of Bezalel graduates, but some of them incorporated the functionalist weaving methods they learned in Bezalel into different types of weaving. On the one hand, Rina Milon showed a table cover that embodied the structuralist monochromatic Bezalel style, which you can see here. And on the other hand, Hannah Rosen created tapestries with her husband Shlomo Rosen, which she defined as materially driven and at the same time autonomous objects. Warshavsky showed striped fabrics she designed for Mesquite, but she also responded to the new spirit of art craft by creating her first ever wall hanging featuring a loose structure of hand-dyed threads that she categorized as op art. And you can see both works also here in the installation view. The exhibition was therefore highly diverse. Gaon explained that he intended to, quote, show a representation of everything that happens today in the creative field of soft thread. And I tried to encompass the endless and almost unlimited possibilities of using thread for art and for industrial products with an art motif, end quote. He indeed added several fabrics machine-made in large factories and stated that it was enough for a work, quote, to reveal something about the potential of thread from a perspective unseen in other works, end quote. Gaon's curatorial choice resulted from the limited scope of Israeli textile art and design, but it also defied recently set international conventions. As scholars wrote, seminal fiber art exhibitions such as the Museum of Modern Art's 1967 wall hangings attempted to elevate fiber art beyond the status of traditional craft or applied art. In works in thread, applied and art textiles were co-exhibited. At the same time, it was precisely the large concentration of wall hangings and soft sculpture in non-traditional techniques that made the exhibition a singular event. The next museum exhibition dedicated to a wide display of local textile art in Israel would happen in 2014. Whether defined as traditional craft, applied art, or fine art, textiles made in Israel between the 1950s and 1970s were shaped by the influx of immigrants arriving from all over the world, bringing styles and ideas translated and adapted to local needs. Museum and gallery exhibitions created order and meaning within this constant change. The mediation of exhibitions was essential, as I showed, for the process of textiles becoming objects to be looked at, to use Annie Albers's term, pulling them out of the domestic or commercial realm and into the space of aesthetic contemplation. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Noga, for that lovely presentation. Thank you, all of you. And I'm very excited to go from the hardstone tables to the softness of weaving, as Noga said, to now the medium of paper, with Made in Japan, development of the poster medium in Japanese commercial art and design with Nozomi Naoi and Erin Schoneveld.
Hello, this is a joint presentation by Nozomi Naoi and Erin Schoneveld, and it stems from our research for the exhibition we are curating. Made in Japan 20th Century Poster Art at the Poster House Museum in New York, opening from March next year. It showcases Japanese posters from the Merrill C. Berman collection, which contains more than 1,000 Japanese posters, and the images we will show today come from this collection. The content and style of 20th century Japanese poster art and design reflects Japan's rich visual culture and printmaking tradition that values collaboration and creative vision among artists, designers, publishers, printers, brands, and their audiences. While rooted in the ukiyo-e tradition of woodblock printmaking, Japanese posters of the 20th century are also defined by their synthesis of commercial and fine art, as well as advancements in reprographic media. During the pre-modern Edo period, businesses commissioned prints of famous kabuki actors and beautiful courtesans that included images of their own shops in the backgrounds, an example you're seeing on the screen here. Other formats such as the ebira, picture handbill, kokokubira, advertisement handout, and ekanban, picture signboard also flourished during this time. Later, in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan embraced modern foreign printing technologies, such as the rotary press, offset printing, and photographic reproduction, leading to a proliferation of printed materials in color. The publishing industry that had previously relied upon woodblock printing also began to incorporate these new printing techniques. Tracing the evolution of 20th century Japanese poster art and design, however, is also a challenging task. The historical context alone is a complex one. 2 world wars, coupled with rapid post-war industrialization and urbanization around the globe, Japan's specific journey as an aggressor and victim of war, and its presence as an international player on the world stage is reflected through the visual and commercial content of its posters. For example, this poster is considered one of the masterpieces of Japanese graphic design. Fully utilizing the unique relationship between image and text, the poster's typography plays on the pictographic origins of Chinese characters, incorporating the character for tree, ki, which repeated twice becomes the character for woods, hayashi, and with a third character added on top becomes the character for forest, mori. These characters are dispersed throughout the composition, suggesting a typographic forest. Font size is varied to give visual sense of the different scale of the trees, and some characters are tilted to further enhance their function as a graphic element. This encapsulates how Japanese designers conceived new forms of graphic media that combined a traditional Japanese aesthetic with Western design idioms.
In the years leading up to and following World War I, Japan witnessed unprecedented prosperity. Advances in public transportation, communication, education, and print publishing increased opportunities for the growing urban middle class and contributed to the rise of mass culture. Technological innovations in commercial printing and photography improved the quality of images and the demand for posters promoting a modern lifestyle that emphasized the consumption of Western goods. In an effort to shape the national perception of Japan, posters played a critical role in selling an image that fused modern identity with an active participation in consumerism. This was also an era in which the rise of Japanese imperialism became intricately tied to the government's agenda of industrialization and modernization. As a result, posters also became a propaganda tool for selling an image of modern Japan that was culturally and economically superior to other Asian nations. The poster you see here is from a larger series produced for the Nikkei Clothing and Textile Company. It was created by artist and commercial designer Okuyama Gihachiro, who worked primarily within the Shin-hanga and Sosaku-hanga movements of woodblock printing. During the 1930s, Okuyama produced advertisements for the Nikkei Clothing and Textile Company to market its Western-style clothing, including woolen suits, knitwear, and socks. This poster reflects both the Japanese consumer's taste for Western dress and Okuyama's training in Sosaku-hanga, a woodblock printing movement characterized by personal expression, often involving artists carving and printing their own designs, to create a dynamic composition that blended typography and illustration. Japan's reemergence after its devastating defeat in the Pacific War was characterized by a variety of political shifts and economic transformations that shaped the trajectory of post-war society. The militarism and patriotism of wartime were replaced with themes promoting recovery, peace, and prosperity. In the preceding decades of the post-war era, Japan hosted a number of major international events, including the 1964 Tokyo Summer Olympics, the 1970 Osaka Expo, and the 1975 Okinawa Ocean Expo that celebrated national progress and symbolized a successful return to the global arena. Posters of this period, such as the ones you see here, blended elements of traditional Japanese art with modern graphic design, advertising the recasting of Japan's global image through international partnerships and transnational cultural exchange. Japanese designers such as Kamekura Yusaku and Nagai Kazumasa introduced a new and distinctive national identity as they reimagined established Japanese motifs for a contemporary audience with text and image that blended elements of traditional and modern design. This blending of tradition and modernity is perhaps best exemplified in the work of designer Tanaka Iko. Over his 50-year career, Tanaka developed a commercial style that combined traditional Japanese artistic forms with modernist principles of simplicity, clarity, and minimalism. Tanaka was internationally recognized as a leading force in commercial and corporate branding, especially in his role as the first artistic director of the Japanese retailer Muji, where he introduced his signature minimalist style. This is perhaps Tanaka's best-known poster, created for the Asian Performing Arts Institute and its celebration of traditional Japanese dance, music, and theater. It depicts the highly stylized head and shoulders of a female dancer with simple geometric forms and colors. Tanaka reinvented traditional motifs through this kind of bold color blocking and abstraction in an effort to package Japanese culture for an international audience. In 2016, Japanese fashion designer Issey Miyake paid homage to the graphic motifs and designs of Tanaka Iko by reimagining the Nihon Buyo poster design into a jacket for his Pleats Please collection.
After World War II, Japan embarked upon one of the most intense and sustained periods of economic growth in modern history. Japan's economic miracle ushered in a new era of industry and trade, as well as a burgeoning middle class. The Japanese government shifted away from heavy wartime industry, encouraging the local production of light industry, including the production of cars and electrical appliances. During the 1950s, posters and advertisements for home electronics boasted a domestically produced new electric era. Among them, companies such as Sony appeared. Sony is perhaps one of the most globally recognized Japanese brands to emerge during this era. We may remember the first model of the Walkman was released in 1979, sparking a global boom and paving the path for portable music. This poster is a wonderful example. As Sony's portable electronic devices like the Walkman and video camera developed, battery sales gained necessary popularity. Here, an enlarged photograph of one battery serves as a vertical pillar around which 5 members of the Japanese girls' rock band, Princess Princess, or Princess Princessu, stand alongside the text, "Music with me." The popular band, battery, and reference to the portability of music all create a strong brand identity around the Sony Corporation. Japan's shift to export trade, including electronics and automobiles, also initiated a leisure boom that was marked by personal enrichment through a lifestyle of leisure, comfort, and beauty. In response, companies sought to build their corporate images through poster design that mirrored these changing desires. Among the leading brands was the cosmetic company Shiseido. Founded in 1872, it remains a globally recognized cosmetic brand. With famous art directors and graphic designers, Shiseido produced stunning visual advertisements and posters to bolster their corporate image and identity. These posters here were created for Shiseido's bronze summer tan oil and powder foundation. The contour of the woman's face amongst bronze powder mimics a desert scene of sand mountains and conveys the idea of sand, sun, and sweat. Similarly, the poster with the reclining woman also employs the contours of her body to echo the curves of the sand dunes. The Big Summer campaign won the designer the Tokyo Art Directors Club prizes for 3 successive years. Notice a small photograph of the product only appears above the brand's logo. Shiseido's posters did not focus on the actual product, but instead reinforced the concept of establishing individual identity through consumption.
As industry and mass culture gradually revived during Japan's post-war era, it was accompanied by the partial Americanization of modern life, a condition accelerated by the Allied occupation. Even after the end of the occupation, there continued to be a sustained influx of U.S. commercial products, in addition to a rising awareness of the political and social protests of the counterculture movement. All of this was assisted by the dramatic evolution of electronic media, including television, film, radio, and music. Amidst this atmosphere of change, Japanese artists attempted to rethink hierarchy on every level of the art world as they pressured definitions of art and exhibition practices by blurring the boundaries between commercial and fine art. Many artists moved their creative practice into city streets, parks, playgrounds, and underground theaters. These activities eventually paved the way for the anti-art, conceptual art, and pop art movements of the 1960s and 70s, which not only sought to reconceive the relationship between art and society, but were also responding to the anxieties and political turmoil of the Cold War era. In this milieu, the work of Yoko Tadanori and Tanami Keiichi, two of Japan's most famous artists and commercial designers, inhabit the fluid space between art and advertising. Throughout his career, Yoko Tadanori aspired to eliminate the barriers between art and daily life, experimenting in various media and modes of representation, including graphic design, illustration, painting, film, animation, and fashion. Yoko is perhaps most celebrated for his bold and intensely colorful posters from the 1960s, such as the poster here on the left titled Koshimaki Osen, in which fragmented images of mass media, photographs, and ukiyo-e motifs are transposed and reproduced into a dynamic screen-printed collage. However, Yoko is also appreciated for his commercial work with major brands such as Suntory, in which his posters straddle the graphic and the painterly and bridge the gap between commercial design and high art, the avant-garde and the popular. Similarly, Tanami Keiichi's artistic output spans painting, illustration, graphic design, animation, and sculpture. Tanami began his career in commercial art direction by exposure to the Neo-Dada organizers of the early 1960s, as well as participation in the Animation Festival at Sogetsu Art Center in 1965 and 1966, inspired him to expand his practice and embrace a variety of new visual styles and approaches. Tanami was a leading figure in Japan's pop art movement and is most famous for his colorful psychedelic designs, such as the ones you see here, that blend pop culture iconography with printing techniques of silkscreen and collage to create music album jackets for bands such as Jefferson Airplane and the Monkees, as well as book posters for avant-garde cinema and designs for the Japanese edition of Playboy. In conclusion, the creation of Japanese posters is the result of fruitful collaboration among artists, designers, printing companies, publishers, corporations, and brands, as they utilize various reprographic technologies to produce visual media that reflects a heightened relationship with the present moment. The evolution of 20th century Japanese posters demonstrates the important intersection between design history, spheres of commercial and fine art, and global transmission. Thank you very much, and I hope you will have the opportunity to see our exhibition next March.
And thank you to Erin and Nozomi for a wonderful talk. And now that we are into the era of industrialization, we'll be looking into that a little bit further. And a little bit further into eco-criticism as well, with Minecraft Design Histories of Mining, with Ellen Huang and Arden Stern.
By presenting a multidisciplinary and design-based genealogy of mining through 3 case studies, cobalt mining, crypto mining, and Minecraft gameplay, our project seeks to remedy the under-analysis of labor in histories of digital design and product design. The case studies we present today are infrastructurally linked. Cobalt is a key component of the lithium-ion batteries that power contemporary computing. This link allows us to situate labor at the intersection of geological resource extraction, computational power, and design. Our research is ongoing, but for the purposes of today, we will be exploring our case studies in the context of how they have been mediated. The only form of mining that we directly engaged in during our research was playing Minecraft. Minecraft is, of course, a social activity in which we engage in competitive world-making in a virtual playground, a highly designed environment in which resources are seemingly infinite. Indeed, everything the player encounters in Minecraft is the material to be extracted and used. Even in Chinese, Minecraft appears in some instances as 我的世界, a phrase roughly translated as my world. The Chinese language title makes clear the possessive and consumed aspects of this imaginary game world, reifying the game as a fetishized commodity. a fantastical simulation of extraction, production, and consumption of materials. This is a gamification of mining labor, upon which digital infrastructures depend and without which Minecraft would not exist.
This presentation will foreground the ways in which labor practices intersect media and material. We ultimately seek to develop a design historical framework for mining that links design labor to the labor processes yielding the materials designers engage, and to move beyond the seemingly inherent qualities of material toward the laborers and labor processes often erased through the mediation of materials. Marx's concept of commodity fetishism continues to be relevant for the ways in which it ties the magic of commodities not to their material form, but rather to their status as products of labor. With this foundation, the history of design is a history of labor. Our project proposes that analyzing the relations between materials and labor, inclusive of but also beyond digital infrastructures, is a historical and practical problem for design with its own distinctive ancestry.
Cobalt is a colorant whose extraction and deployment is integral to the production of some of the world's most recognized design products. Originally from Persian lands, refined cobalt eventually became a pigment for use in a ceramic production complex at the manufacturing site of Jindajen in the late 1300s. Cobalt's labor nexus produced one of the world's earliest global visual cultures. Presumed to be mined from around Kashan in present-day Iran, cobalt required processing through intense physical processes of crushing, levigating, and firing. The vast distances that separate the geological location of mined cobalt and the workshops that deployed the material for making lustrous ceramic objects render invisible the bodies that make possible the extraction of this desired resource. While textual sources and the historical distance obscure the dangerous facets of the cobalt manufacturing industry, a 1301 text by a prominent ceramic artist from Kashan offers us some sense of the life-threatening conditions of mining. Referring to the mountainous regions from which cobalt can be mined, the potter wrote of these risks in his ceramic manual that we show in this slide.
Today, cobalt is an essential component of energy technologies, a key metallic element that is deployed to make superalloys. Cobalt's corrosion-resistant properties at high temperatures makes it a crucial superalloy used to line and thus extend the life of batteries that power mobile phones, laptop computers, and rechargeable batteries in electric vehicles. Like the historical conjectures that frame the study of cobalt in relation to the ceramic and glass industries, the present-day supply chain webs in which cobalt is used in digital and clean energy industries are convoluted and inscrutable. Roughly 65% of cobalt mines are located in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. For the most part, the processes of the mineral's extraction and refinement are opaque to designers, end users, and companies such as Samsung, Apple, and even Tesla, who purchase the industrially manufactured batteries making use of cobalt. Cobalt in its raw state must first come from either industrial mining or independent artisanal mining efforts. Though some industrial mines belong to production pipeline monopolies, most are semi-independent entities with investment from larger mining companies. Industrial mining companies, such as Congo Dongfang International Mining, often rely upon artisanal mining as a source of ore to supplement their own. Artisanal miners are not employed by corporations, but rather mine independently, often with hand tools, for subsistence wages. Studies by Amnesty International and other human rights groups have noted the connection between international demand for cobalt and the participation of adults and children in highly unregulated and dangerous working conditions. Mined cobalt is traded through brokers and companies who purchase the raw material and sell it to refining companies such as Glencore, based in Switzerland, and Huayu, based in China. The majority of cobalt refinement takes place in China, which is responsible for the import of 97% of the world's cobalt.
Once cobalt concentrate arrives at refineries, it is combined with other elements to produce a variety of powdered cobalt compounds, all of which are key compounds in the creation of battery cathodes, which are eventually used in designed products. As such, cobalt is an accumulation of labor relations that are decentralized and dispersed, with the figure of the laborer dematerialized. This is necessarily a global conversation, with even ancient histories of resource extraction fundamentally shaped by incommensurate processes of cross-cultural translation. This indeterminacy of sources, their translation, and even the identification of the geological material being mined gives us an idea of how digging up valuable resources results in a further abstraction of the cobalt miner's labor beyond recognition.
Cryptocurrency is an asset class that exists only in digital form and is often defined by its decentralization and immateriality. Rather than being managed by a financial authority such as a bank, cryptocurrency operates through a distributed ledger such as a blockchain, which is a permanent and encrypted document of transactions held on a dispersed network of computers. Cryptocurrency has been the focus of recent headlines as the value of cryptocurrencies has fallen exponentially across the board since the end of 2021 amidst broader market instability. Such crashes are typical of the poorly regulated cryptocurrency market, which has undergone profound shifts in both its operations and its economic status since Bitcoin was first released in 2009. Contrary to crypto, much of the global monetary system is a centrally managed digital record of ownership, debit, and credit. In the case of cryptocurrency, trust is derived not from political or economic stability, as with fiat currencies like the US dollar, but rather from the public nature of the ledger that documents ownership and transactions. Financial information is verified through the solving of a cryptographic problem, or proof of work, that forms the basis of cryptocurrency's value. This operation is known as mining, with the increasingly vast networks of servers that perform these cryptographic operations known as mining farms. Cryptocurrency coins, such as Bitcoin, are generated as transaction fees granted to the first miner who verifies a series of transactions or block in this manner, which is then permanently added to the distributed ledger. This form of mining labor requires an extensive assortment of resources, including specialized hardware and software, and access to ample amounts of electricity. Whereas a single personal computer once possessed enough power to mine for cryptocurrency, now individuals must obtain membership in a mining pool, through which miners combine their computing power to more quickly complete a block of verified transactions.
In other words, crypto mining labor is dependent upon other forms of labor, the mining of silica, copper, aluminum, and other minerals, the transport and manufacture of these minerals into integrated circuits and cooling systems, the creation and maintenance of power grids, and a growing amount of server maintenance labor on corporate crypto mining farms. In the introduction to an article proposing Bitcoin, pseudonymous author Satoshi Nakamoto states, "The system is secure as long as an honest nodes collectively control more CPU power than any cooperating group of attacker nodes." In other words, cryptocurrency relies entirely upon a system of automation that cannot function unless the resources powering it grow exponentially. Increasingly powerful processing units in increasingly vast networks, powered by the increasing consumption of energy via the electrical grid, add up to a fantasy of infinite resources. Infinite copper and cobalt, infinite bodies to mine and transport them, infinite manufacturing capacity and bodies to perform the immaterial labor of engineering, computing equipment, and networks, infinite natural gas, coal, and nuclear energy to power the entire process from start to finish. This fantasy of infinity does not stray far from other more familiar forms of magical economic thinking. The infinity fantasy is powered by design in myriad ways, from the clever graphics and branding initiatives behind individual cryptocurrencies advertised across various media platforms to the design of new cryptocurrencies, trading platforms, and crypto wallets. Non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, have emerged in the past 5 years as a form of blockchain technology that, unlike cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, cannot be replicated. NFTs are often created and marketed as digital art assets that, like physical works of art, can be owned by an individual. As art historian Tina Rivers Ryan writes, tokenized digital art is far from immaterial, not only because of its dependence on hardware systems and resource extraction, but also because NFTs, in theory, if not in practice, reinscribe digital artworks within the framework of scarcity that derives from the exchange value of physical objects. In other words, Even fantasies of infinity built upon notions of immateriality depend upon realities and discourses of limitation and even depletion.
The first iteration of the Minecraft game was created by a Swedish programmer named Marcus Persson and released for free by Mojang, the studio Persson founded in 2009. Today, with over 200 million copies of the game sold worldwide, players can engage in any of 5 modes: survival, creative, spectator, adventure, and hardcore, to explore an algorithm-generated and thus infinite world in which any virtual object or entity can be destroyed, collected, and transformed in open-ended gameplay. The player's avatar uses barehanded punching to mine these virtual resources until weapons can be collected or generated. The game's code can also be modified, which has generated a modding community of Minecraft game players whose contributions can change the game in a number of ways. As Peter Christensen has written, video game modding precedes the commercialization of video games, and this legacy continues to inform the relationship between players, developers, and multinational tech corporations. Minecraft offers a simulation and gamification of resource extraction as well as coding labor. Since Mojang's acquisition by Microsoft in 2014, the relationship between players, modders, and developers has changed dramatically. The community standards page on Minecraft.net states that all players of Minecraft are bound by the Microsoft Services Agreement, affirming that all Minecraft gameplay occurs under corporate auspices. In 2021, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella announced that Minecraft modders had generated over $350 million from more than 1 billion downloads of mods, add-ons, and other experiences in Minecraft. While the modders themselves can keep most of the revenue they generate, Microsoft takes a percentage.
Minecraft mediates labor through play, of which mining and modding are crucial forms. This play-based mining has entrenched another fantasy, that we can control the conditions of our labor, that we have power, that we can possess our world. One of the key points that our research pointed to in all of our case studies is that miners do not organize the conditions of their mining, rendering mining structural, whether performed virtually through gameplay and modding, automatically by carefully tended crypto mining rigs, or physically by artisanal cobalt miners in the DRC. The proliferation of virtual technology in the actual construction and mining industry further highlights the mediation of mining labor. For our research project, we participated in a demonstration of the simulation technology used to train miners whose companies deploy CAT equipment. As design and virtual reality move increasingly into overlapping spheres, the act of mining, much as in Minecraft, becomes a virtualized game realm. In these disparate game worlds, labor is fun, and the conditions of labor, including wage compensation, safety standards, and bodily practice, are a play-based experience of commodity fetish. The former mining machine operator who led the demo noted that the experience of operating the virtual rig bears a resemblance to the video games he plays recreationally. The immersiveness of VR technologies is not merely aesthetic or haptic, as they, like Minecraft, blur the boundary between wage labor and play. This paper has examined 3 case studies where mining serves as a convergence of both conceptual and physical processes across digital and embodied practices. Each of the case studies produces design products and technologies that rely on a raw material dependent upon some form of mining, be it geological, transactional, or virtual. Cobalt mining, crypto mining, and Minecraft gaming also comprise hyperlocal valences across global chains of productions, often described as decentralized. At face value, these mining practices seem to indicate a shift from physical to digital worlds, but this materialist study of mining suggests a more complex horizon of mediations. If anything, the pressures of the physical aspects of mining are lost and abstract, and the figure of the miner removed from visibility through degrees of mediation.
Thus far, the project's research has been equally as mediated. What remains a question for exploration is an engagement with the physical aspects of mines and mining. In this way, our future plans involve not only visiting a mine, but to connect the mediation with the materiality of mining in both the digital and geological realms. Mining is at once defined by fantasies of unlimited resource extraction, unconstrained by physical considerations, and linked to global histories of capitalist and colonial expansion, spanning geographic and virtual territories alike.
Well, thank you everyone for staying with us. And thank you for that last talk. I hear that we also have someone very young in the audience who enjoyed it very much. So thank you, Ellen and Arden. And if I could ask all of the presenters to now turn on their video and microphone so that we can ask you a few questions. Hello, Wenyi, Nozomi, Aaron, Arden, Noga. So first, I just wanted to say that it was a really fascinating slate of presentations. I was really excited to see how there were so many different interpretations of this topic, and also how there were a lot of sort of dichotomies made that were then, sort of shattered and complicated between the hands-on and the industrial, the hard and the soft, quite literally, the traditional and the modern, collaboration and singularity, especially in terms of individual labor, the so-called real and what's extrapolated from it, as well as the idea of permanence and ephemerality. I think particularly with you, Wenyi, I think of these tables as being the utmost of something that seems permanent, that seems like it will never go away. But I think through the talks, and especially Aaron and Nozomi in terms of posters, you think of them as ephemera, but now they're preserved in various different ways. And then Arden and Ellen, you get into things like Bitcoin that are very much thought of as ephemeral, but they are very much linked to a very real resource. And they're really, the idea of permanence comes down to the idea of the material, the resource, and how infinite we can make that resource. So I was just wondering if anyone wanted to say anything about how either permanence or ephemerality sort of affected how they thought about material in this case.
Maybe I can start. I mean, certainly, like even in primary sources from my period, there is a huge sort of association of stone with like eternity, durability, and all that. I guess in my talk, I didn't address these problems, but actually in my own research, I'm trying to slightly steer away from this association and try to think about process and I guess part of my research was also concerned a lot with how artisans is responding to the circulation of materials and fragments so that, to kind of place all these processes into motion so that it's not like to kind of help us rethink what is stone, or because that's and I feel like there's a lot of myths surrounding the durability of stones, when actually in a lot of those tables there are clear signs of fragments and kind of fracture. And in text, there are some of these period texts, they are trying to say like this whole piece is made out of one single thing. It looks like a single, it's a single piece, or so there are a lot of those, but actually this is a craft that's all about assemblage and kind of assemblage of fragments, so that it's not actually at all that eternal as how it was described. So that's something, well, just from my case, that's what I would say for as a start.
Wonderful, thank you. And we may come back to this topic, but we have a few more questions coming up. First from Laurence, she asks, what do you think enhancing the game with smell and touch would make it more realistic? So I think this is for Ellen and Arden.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think it's a really interesting one. Also because Uh, Something that we actually, this is coming out of a lot of research, as you saw. We tried to really condense this for the presentation, but we were actually working with graduate students in the media design practices program at Art Center. So this was sort of a collaboration between historians and designers. And Zoe Wang, who's one of the graduate students that we worked with, actually took on this question that you've asked, Laurence. This idea that part of the playfulness of Minecraft is the fact that there's nothing really physical involved. You can just sort of sit there, and it takes a bare minimum of physical labor to play at artisanal mining labor, basically. This like fantasy of artisanal mining labor, which is of course vastly different than the reality of it. So she's actually working on building a machine that is sort of predicated on this, where you have to work really, really hard to operate it, to do a kind of simulation of Minecraft gameplay. So I think that you're right on the money with that question. This is, of course, kind of a fantasy object that Zoe's building, a sort of piece of critical design. But yeah, I think that it's something that becomes really, really noticeable when we look at different forms and metaphors of mining, where physical labor, where a sort of physiological experience and even a dangerous experience becomes mediated. Can we then challenge that by bringing it back to the physical, even in some of these small ways?
Yeah, I know that smell has become very big in the museum world in terms of bringing people into those experiences, but it's very funny trying to bring labor into that. Almost in the way that people joke CrossFit is a form of construction just for exercise. How do you get someone into that, truly into that feeling? So I think it's fascinating to try and make that more realistic. And we have another question from Grace for Wenyi. She says, you make the wonderful case for the linkages between the Pietradura table and the faceted cut diamonds. Do you think your method might be applied to more quotidian, everyday designed objects? And if so, I would be interested to hear how.
Just a moment. I catch the first bit. I didn't catch the second half of the question. In relation to the everyday.
Do you think your method in terms of linking the Pietradura and diamonds or jewels, do you think your method might be applied to more everyday designed objects? And if so, she would be interested to hear how.
I think that's a difficult question because I work with the most elitist kind of craft objects possible within that period, even though it, like in our history, it was, I guess, marginalized to some degree compared to the other things. I guess it depends on what kind of objects or design objects that that this question is referring to. So without a specific case, I don't know how to answer this.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because you started out talking about these as jewels and facets, but then you also mentioned them as possibly diagrams. So that made me think of a lot of Renaissance theory talking about jewels or other small objects and even humans as microcosms of the bigger universe. So even as these tables are between jewels and architecture, like you said, um, every size and every type of thing like reflects on something else in some way.
Yes.
So I think in a way, yeah, you did reflect these against architecture as well.
Yes, I guess there's a very interesting case in terms of like microcosm and, well, because I kind of mentioned how these tables are put, well, some of these tables includes signs of identity, but there's one table in Palazzo Pitti that it's an oval table that basically has the personal
our astrological signs of the patron kind of encircling the whole table. So the sense of like personhood and microcosmic, if we want to think about the microcosm in terms of like individual human, but that might not be related to the initial question. Yeah, I think it depends on the specific context, so I don't know how to comment specifically on this question, but yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. I also thought it was fantastic as also, yeah, like you said, as personally a miniature collection of all these different stones. You know, it's not just, it's almost like a Wunderkammer in itself. But yeah, they were absolutely fantastic to see. And it looks like we have a question from Paul. Do you feel there's a solution or remedy for how the materiality of immaterial media perpetuates the inequality and top-down management of social difference and inequality? So I think this makes a lot of sense for me in terms of the last talk, but anyone, of course, can reply. So how the materiality of immaterial media perpetuates the inequality and top-down management of social difference and inequality. It's a lot to chew on. So, Arden and Ellen, do you want to give this a shot?
Yeah, I don't know. I want Ellen to jump into here. I think that this is part of why we were going back to Marx in that sense. And this is even something that I talk to my students about a lot, teaching at an art and design college, where there is this sort of, particularly in the wake of industrialization and everything that's happened afterwards, neoliberalization. There's this kind of elision and erasure all the way through, and this is part of how media operates in this kind of environment. So it was something I was really fascinated with in the presentation about Japanese posters, the way in which the scale and iconicity of these commodities is sort of played with, linking up with really complex intersecting histories, like creating a kind of a new myth of how commodities kind of operate in globalized visual cultures. And so I feel like this is, again, at no point would we ever see the laborer. It's like the objects kind of dropped out of the sky, right, into this sort of pre-made sort of set of categories for them to operate in semiotically. So I would almost, I would want to ask, the rest of the presenters kind of the same question, right? Because we're all dealing very heavily with whether they're these very elite objects, whether they're quote unquote craft objects, or whether they're, sort of mass-produced, communications through graphic design. We're kind of all dealing with these sort of legacies of erasure of who is actually doing the labor. It's like, so this poster, so like what was happening with that paper, what was happening with that ink, that's like, it's viewed almost as besides the point, right? And so that I think is what Ellen and I were attempting to just interrogate a bit.
Yeah,
Anyone want to jump in? Thanks, Erin.
I'm happy to jump in. I do think it's interesting. I mean, with Nozomi and I, as we tried to articulate that, print culture, or sort of this form of material culture with poster making was highly collaborative in many ways. And yet, as sort of noted, the focus seems to be, the poster sort of the end product, right? And that we don't see sort of through the end product what's rendered invisible or not visible to the viewer, to the audience of the poster, right? Is the collaborative endeavor of the designer, the artist, the printer, the publisher, right? The patron, or the sort of all of the entities involved. And so that certainly, I think something to, the sort of emphasis is sort of on process, but also on the final product. And here, mostly what we see is the final product being circulated and rendered highly accessible and visible to a broad audience. And just also thinking to, Callie, that earlier question you'd had about ephemerality. I mean, I do think with posters, as a form of print culture, a lot of what they do is, to engage with a sort of a heightened relationship with the present moment, whatever that moment is, right? And within that context, they really do seek to shape whether it's the social, political, or ideological sort of values of that time through the design, through the content that's been created and that's being circulated and displayed. So there is an interesting tension there too, I think, about not only the ephemerality of paper, that sort of content, or posters being produced in such large quantity to be circulated, but also even in the content that they're reflecting and engaging with.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the visibility of the posters, where in that way, the very surface of them is meant to be seen by wide audiences, whereas when you get to the inlaid stone tables, that's of course going to be a precious object that's kind of stowed away, that's not going to be shown to anyone. And then in the case of mining, half of what's happening is completely invisible. But so are the processes behind the posters. But that message is the most visible of some of these objects. So we also had a little bit more in the chat. Some commentary for Wen Yi on durability or not durability. Your work seemed to be part of a larger current research project in 16th century Italian studies to reconsider and critique traditional notions of the paragone. So thank you for your perspective. And I think, yeah, there have been a lot of different artists working on these things, but that also brings up another question I had. So I think with Noga in particular, I had a question about the singular versus the collaborative in terms of weaving, which tends to be seen as a singular art. But also when you didn't really talk about the process of, how many people are involved in making a table. And I really didn't start thinking about this until listening to the other talks and the idea of either collaboration or exploitation. But, when it comes down to it, how many people are involved in a single object, or even the conversation of that object existing. So I guess I was first of all asking, are these single artisans that do the final work on these projects for Wen Yi? But then for others, how much is the process more collaborative than people might understand, or more exploitative than they may understand? And particularly for Erin and Nozomi, is it all collaboration, or is some of it also exploitative in some ways?
I think I can answer quite a bit about the exploitative, or in terms of what we're saying, that different forms of labor and inequality. I think it's very present in my archival sources that there are actually, well, I guess different forms of labor. There are even animals involved, and there are slaves involved. So different levels of kinds of labors. Slaves were recorded as kind of helping with the creation of abrasive materials for the cutting of stones. So that's like one stage even before the actual handling and manipulation of these materials. And that abrasive material is actually crucial for the whole technical process. So what do we make of their presence in archival sources? That's something that I have been thinking quite a lot about. And so clearly it's based on a very unequal kind of labor structure, and clearly a single table is made out of many different hands. And it's problematic that in catalogs usually the table is assigned, authorship to a designer or like an architect or an artist, and then there are usually potentially a name of the artisan that's kind of recorded in the sources, but then there are many people who don't have names in the documents, but were certainly involved. So
Yeah,
and
not everyone.
they resonate with the digital
Yeah.
presence in ways. So yes.
Yeah, no, that's great to think about. Not everyone is Michelangelo digging his own marble. And and you even mentioned having ivory in some of the tables, which is of course, an entire animal whose life is sacrificed. And this goes back to what Leslie was saying in the chat, um, that the objects of the cabinet of curiosity filled with, or the luxury objects in a cabinet of curiosity is very similar to what's in these tables. But then that also goes to, so Aaron and Nozomi, this goes back to the industrialization of the paper and who is working in those mills, as well as, who is creating the thread and the yarn for weaving as well. So really thinking about these labor processes. So in terms of yes, sorry, Winnie.
Because I feel like maybe there's a way to also go back to the textile and exhibition, because I'm thinking about sort of exhibition as a framing of all these objects. What kind of message it kind of presents to the public, because we display these objects, but how much do we account for the whole labor process and all these things? It's very difficult. Like for my objects, they are usually kind of presented as this kind of marvelous, wondrous thing in relation to the early kind of collecting practice, but then the actual making process involves a lot more that is invisible. So I'm because I guess like in the textile talk, it's pretty much about exhibition as a kind of mediating kind of framework. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely it's definitely a relevant question for my talk. I think in the exhibition that I mentioned of my Mesquite, there was definitely this element of putting labor on display. There were live demonstrations in addition to products. And it's interesting to think about it in the framework that you brought up, because on the one hand, it did sort of make the labor present. But as we look at this today, a lot of commentators that I mentioned have looked at it as very exploitative and exotifying, and related it to phenomena like the indigenous villages in world expositions, etc. And what's interesting for me is that a lot of the research that has been done on textiles in Israel did actually engage this question of exploitations in relation to Mesquite and this early stage where it employed many different craft makers from disenfranchised communities. And a lot of really important work has been done on that by anthropologists and sociologists and also art historians. But then there's this shift that I mentioned in the 1960s to a totally different type of practice that relates to textiles, this individualist practice that really relates to these broader international cairns. And what's interesting for me is that much less scholarship has been done on this aspect of Israeli design history. So even though this is sort of the more kind of privileged type of art practice as we perceive it, like this, there's this shift from the anonymized craft maker. As you noticed, I show this picture of this weaver from the 1956 exhibition at the Tel Aviv Museum who gave a live demonstration. And I found this image, but we don't have the name of this weaver. We just know that, or at least here, we know that where she was from. And then there's a shift to this practice of fiber art and art textiles that puts forward the individual maker. But at the same time, and like Callie said, there's all these dichotomies that are then being kind of deconstructed in themselves. I mean, this history of exhibitions remains largely unknown. And all the artists that I mentioned in my presentation, I mean, 99% of them would not be recognized by anyone, even Israeli art scholars or design scholars, because still this, I think, association of textiles to craft and to making and to this kind of labor puts it in the margins of craft scholarship. So just because it's sort of more individualized and less anonymized practice still doesn't mean that it has been properly recognized.
Wonderful. Ellen, you may need to unmute yourself. Okay. That was really wonderful. And yeah, it was really interesting to hear about that sort of going back to the individual. Also because it's almost eschewing the idea that you need to be part of this larger structure of whether it be collaboration or exploitation, but then the exhibition is its own collaboration that is a little bit more equal as you're all choosing to be there. So we have another question. Grace says, I visited a display of posters at the Museum for Gestaltung in Zurich in April, which used facsimile posters only, mounted along a corridor. What do you think about the materiality of the poster in such display tactics?
Nozomi, did you want to pop in? I'm happy to start here. So you said used facsimile posters only.
Mounted along a corridor.
So visited display posters in the museum. Well, I think it raises an interesting idea. I mean, one, you know, and Nozomi and I have had conversations about this within the context of how we've understood and have been engaging with posters is the sort of the commercial role of the poster and then how it becomes an object or sort of a material object of display, right, within an exhibition or sort of institutional space versus, you know, in many cases they were made for to be displayed in more commercial settings or public spaces that weren't, you know, a curated exhibition. And we're working on an exhibition right now, and so that's something that we've thought a lot about and discussed, just in terms of that sort of tension between the commercial and the fine art, with the way in which a poster in this context would be displayed in a museum, or, you know, sort of was produced for, I think, a different setting. But then also too, you know, there were certainly a lot of Japanese posters that were made specifically for exhibition and display. So they were sort of created as part of a series for department store exhibitions or other spaces in which the goal was not necessarily to sell a product, but to display the designer's expertise or sort of training. And then these posters were then submitted to poster biennales and so forth, or, you know, and awarded prizes. So I think there's an interesting tension there. In terms of the ones that were mounted in facsimile along a corridor, I mean, I'm not sure in terms of facsimile. I mean, posters are mass-produced objects, so I find that interesting phrasing. I'm not sure if I quite understand what you mean by facsimile posters. But I do think it's interesting. I'd be curious to know sort of what the posters were about, or sort of what the theme or the content was. But I think there's an interesting way in which posters sort of move across the commercial and the fine art in terms of their exhibition and display.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your answers. It's much appreciated. And thank you for being able to join us, and for everyone else coming to see all of the presentations. We are going to end at 1 p.m. as we had promised, even though I have many, many more questions. We also have one more in the chat, which is just a comment for Wenyi, that the connection between the tabletops and gemstones might open up the discussion, perhaps metaphorically, to the alchemical workshop. And quite frankly, I have some thoughts on that too. So we will talk. But it's been really lovely having all of you. It's been a really broad conversation between the presentations and after the presentations on the idea of materiality and mediation, and one that I would like to explore more with Design History Society and Association for Word and Image Studies, and all of the presenters. And I want to thank everyone for coming. We will have a recording of this available for you. And with that, I will wish you a good afternoon. And thank you, Design History Society. Thank you, Association for Word and Image Studies. And thank you to all of our presenters.
Thank you.